I said get out. Get out. Send me someone who knows what they're doing, or I swear to God I'll pull this IV out myself and walk home. The voice boomed down the corridor of Ward 7 at Mercy Veterans Medical Center, sending residents scrambling and rattling the walls like an incoming round. Master Sergeant Roland Holt wasn't just a patient. He was a war hero, a legend, and right now, an absolute nightmare. He looked at the nurse standing at his bedside, a quiet woman with calm, unreadable eyes, and saw nothing but a civilian who couldn't possibly understand his pain. He demanded she leave. He demanded someone qualified, someone who had seen real suffering. He thought he was looking at a stranger. But when she reached across him to adjust his monitor leads, her sleeve rode up, and there, on the inside of her left forearm, in ink so old it had faded from black to weathered blue, was a tattoo that made Roland Holt's heart stop for reasons that had nothing to do with his condition. It was a symbol he hadn't seen since the bloodiest days of Operation Desert Storm. He thought he was fighting a nurse. He didn't realize he was yelling at the only soldier who had ever pulled him out of burning wreckage alive. This is the story of the tattoo that changed everything. The rain in Tacoma didn't fall so much as it settled, a gray, patient weight that pressed down on the city like it had nowhere better to be. Inside Mercy Veterans Medical Center, specifically on Ward 7, the fourth floor dedicated to high-risk veteran cardiac care, the atmosphere was considerably worse than the weather outside. Master Sergeant Roland Iron Cross Holt was not dying gracefully. At 58, Holt was a man built from consequence. 6'2", broad across the shoulders even after months of muscle loss, with hands that looked like they had been designed for an entirely different, more violent world than the one currently surrounding him. 3 tours in the Gulf War, 2 in Somalia, a Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and a heart that was now, quietly and without his permission, betraying him. Congestive heart failure. Complicated by an arrhythmia so unpredictable, his cardiologist had stopped using the word manageable and started using the word watchful. Holt had looked the man dead in the eye and told him he could watch something else. He had been admitted 7 days ago after collapsing in the parking lot of a grocery store in downtown Tacoma. He had refused the ambulance initially. He had tried to drive himself. The paramedics had found him sitting behind the wheel of his truck, jaw set, hands gripping the steering wheel, absolutely unwilling to concede that his body had just done something his willpower couldn't override. That was Roland Holt in a single image. In 7 days, he had driven off 4 nurses, refused his medication twice, delivered a 14-minute lecture to the chief resident about the difference between treating a patient and processing one, and submitted a formal written complaint about the quality of the coffee, which he described in the complaint as an insult to consciousness. Charge Nurse Diana Reeves stood at the nurse's station staring at his file, with the expression of a woman who had chosen the wrong career at least 3 times in her life, and was only now beginning to understand why. He asked for the 4th nurse by name, just to tell her she was doing everything wrong. Diana said to no one in particular. He then corrected her technique from memory, using a field medical manual he apparently has memorized. She set the file down. "We are running out of people. Who's left?" The corridor was quiet. The break room was quieter. Then a chair scraped back from a table. Elena Vasquez stood up. She was not remarkable to look at, which was precisely the point. Medium height, lean, dark hair pulled back with no concession to style whatsoever. She had the kind of face that didn't give things away, not because it was cold, but because whatever fire burned behind it had learned a long time ago to burn without smoke. She moved through the ward the way experienced soldiers move through unfamiliar terrain. Unhurried, deliberate, always knowing exactly where her feet were. She had worked at Mercy for 3 years. She was the nurse other nurses called when a situation had stopped being manageable and started being something else. She didn't explain her past. She kept her left sleeve down in all weather and all circumstances, and nobody had ever seen what was underneath it. Nobody had thought to ask. She picked up Holt's chart, read it in under 90 seconds, and set it back down. Diana looked at her with the cautious hope of a person who has run out of better options. Elena, he's already dismantled 4 people today. He's not just difficult, he's deliberate about it. Elena tucked the medication tray under her arm. Has he hurt anyone? No. Then we're fine. She walked down the corridor without looking back. She didn't knock at room 408. In her experience, men like Holt didn't want the courtesy of a knock. A knock said the person on the other side of the door was asking permission. Elena Vasquez had not asked permission for anything in a very long time. She pushed the door open and walked in, blinds drawn hard against the gray afternoon. The smell of antiseptic over something older, something that reminded her of places she didn't name out loud anymore. Holt was sitting up on the edge of the bed, not lying down, arms crossed over his chest, monitoring leads trailing from under his gown, like he was tolerating them the way a man tolerates a bad situation he hasn't yet figured out how to exit. He looked at her. "Who are you?" he said, the tone of a man who has already decided the answer doesn't matter. Elena set her tray on the counter. "Elena Vasquez, night shift. I'm here to review your medications and check your leads. They've been misread for 2 days because someone placed them incorrectly, and nobody caught it." Holt's eyes narrowed slightly. That was not the answer he expected. "You're telling me they've been giving me readings off a bad setup for 2 days?" "Yes. And nobody noticed." "I noticed," Elena said simply. She turned and walked toward him. "I'm going to fix them now." Holt watched her approach with the particular attention of a man recalculating something. She didn't smile. She didn't soften. She just moved to his bedside and reached across his chest with the calm precision of someone who had done far more difficult things in far worse conditions. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Holt said, quietly and without the rage he had weaponized all week, "You don't move like a nurse." Elena paused for just a fraction of a second. She said nothing. She kept working. And Roland Holt, for the first time in 7 days, let someone do their job without fighting them. He didn't know yet what the tattoo meant. He didn't know yet who was standing at his bedside. But something in his chest, older and deeper than the failing heart, recognized her. It just didn't know why. The next morning came gray and reluctant. Elena arrived for her shift 20 minutes early, the way she always did, checked the overnight notes the way she always did, and walked down the corridor to room 408 the way she had begun to do, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't. She stood outside the door for exactly 3 seconds before pushing it open. Holt was awake. He was always awake. She was beginning to suspect he didn't sleep so much as stand watch in a horizontal position. He looked at her when she entered and said nothing. That was progress. She set her tray down and began her checks. Blood pressure, oxygen, cardiac rhythm. The numbers were marginally better than yesterday, which in Holt's condition meant they were buying time rather than winning anything. "Your heart rate stabilized overnight," she said. "The new lead placement is giving us cleaner readings." Holt watched her work. "How long have you been a nurse?" he asked. The question wasn't hostile. It was something else. Careful. 3 years here, Elena said. And before that, she didn't answer immediately. She moved to the IV line and checked the drip rate. "Before that, I did other things." Holt was quiet for a moment. "Then what kind of other things?" Elena looked at him. "The kind that aren't interesting to talk about over breakfast," she said. She almost smiled. Almost. Holt leaned back against his pillow. He had the look of a man filing something away, rather than dropping it. She had seen that look before, on men who were trained to be patient about the things they wanted to know. He crossed his arms. "You know what I did for 31 years? Marine Corps," she said. 3 Gulf War tours, Somalia. She glanced at him. "It's in your file." "My file," Holt repeated. "My file says Master Sergeant Roland Holt. Decorated, retired. It doesn't say anything real." Elena looked at him properly for the first time that morning. What would real look like? Holt was quiet. Then he said, "It would say that I watched men die in the sand because the intelligence we were given was wrong. It would say that I carried a kid named Ortega for 2 miles through a burning oil field because the evac was 40 minutes late and I wasn't leaving him in that smoke." He looked at the ceiling. "It would say that I came home and nobody knew what to do with me and I didn't know what to do with myself, and that I have been angry ever since at something I can't name and can't fight and can't fix." The room was very quiet. Elena set down her clipboard. She sat in the visitor's chair, which nurses were not supposed to do. She sat in it anyway. "When did the anger start?" she asked. "Really start?" Holt looked at her sideways. "You're not going to write this in my chart, are you?" "No." February 1991. Operation Desert Storm. We were pushing into the Al-Mutla Ridge. Intelligence said the route was clear. Said the Republican Guard had pulled back. He stopped. His jaw tightened. They hadn't pulled back. They were waiting. We drove straight into it. Lost 6 men in the first 4 minutes. 6 men who trusted me to get them through. Elena said nothing. She just listened. Holt looked at his hands. There was a forward surgical team attached to our unit. They came in when the medevacs couldn't reach us. Worked right there in the field, under fire. He shook his head slowly. There was one of them, a corpsman, young, couldn't have been more than 25. She worked on 3 of my men simultaneously in the back of a burning Humvee. She saved 2 of them. He paused. I never got her name. Never got the chance to say thank you. The unit rotated out 2 days later. Elena was very still. She saved 2 of them, Elena said carefully. What happened to the 3rd? Holt's face changed. The neck wound was too far gone. She knew it. I could see her face when she knew it. She kept working anyway. She didn't stop until there was nothing left to do. He looked out the window. That's the kind of person you remember. That's the kind of person you spend 30 years hoping you became worth saving for. Elena stood up slowly. She picked up her clipboard. She walked to the counter with her back to him and stood there for a moment, doing nothing, just standing, her shoulders very still. She turned around. There was something different in her face. Not a crack exactly. More like the outline of something behind the surface, pressing forward and then being pressed back. I need to check your chart notes from overnight, she said. Her voice was steady. I'll be back in 20 minutes with your morning medication. She walked to the door. Then he said, quietly, Vasquez. She stopped. That corpsman, he said. The one from the Al-Mutla Ridge, the forward surgical team she was attached to. They had a unit tattoo. All of them did. A desert sun split down the middle like a broken compass. He paused. Ghost Riders, they called themselves. Stormwatch unit. He looked at her back. I've only ever seen that tattoo once in my life. Elena's hand was on the doorframe. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Because Roland Holt had just described, in precise and careful detail, the tattoo on the inside of her left forearm. The silence stretched between them, like the desert they had both crossed in different directions 30 years ago, and never fully left. Who are you? Holt said. His voice was barely above a whisper. It was the same question he had asked her yesterday. But it wasn't the same question at all. Elena stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she said, I think you already know, Sergeant. And she walked out. She came back in 20 minutes exactly. She had said 20 minutes, and she meant 20 minutes, because Elena Vasquez did not say things she didn't mean, and did not make promises she didn't keep. It was one of the few disciplines she had carried out of the desert intact. She pushed the door open, set the medication tray down, began her checks. Holt didn't say anything immediately. He watched her the way he had watched terrain in Kuwait, slowly, methodically, looking for the thing that didn't fit the pattern. He had spent the 20 minutes she was gone sitting very still and thinking very hard, and arriving at a conclusion that his rational mind kept rejecting and his gut kept insisting on. Finally he said, the Ghost Riders forward surgical team was listed as fully KIA after the Al-Hamra ambush, February 28, 1991. The report was classified for 11 years. Elena kept her eyes on the medication chart. I know what the report said, she replied. Holt's jaw tightened. How do you know what a classified report said? Elena set the chart down. She pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed and sat down in it. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at him with eyes that had stopped pretending to be a nurse's eyes. Because I wrote my own name on that casualty list, she said. The heart monitor beeped steadily in the corner. Outside the window, Tacoma went about its gray business, completely indifferent to what was happening in room 408. Holt stared at her. Talk, he said. His voice was quiet now, stripped of everything except the need to understand. Elena looked at her hands. Then she began. My name wasn't always Elena Vasquez, she said. I was born Elena Reyes. I enlisted at 19. Navy Corpsman. I was attached to the Ghost Riders forward surgical team in January of 1991, 2 weeks before Desert Storm kicked off. I was 23 years old, and I thought I understood what war was going to look like. She stopped. The hospital room dissolved around her edges. Kuwait, February 28, 1991. The oil fields were burning. Elena had seen photographs of it before deployment, satellite images, intelligence briefings. None of it prepared her for the reality. The sky was black at noon. Not dark, black. The smoke from over 300 burning wells formed a ceiling so thick it blocked the sun entirely, and turned the desert into something that felt like the end of the world. The Ghost Riders had been moving with the advance, setting up forward surgical positions wherever the fighting was thickest. They had been running on 4 hours of sleep and adrenaline for 6 days straight. The Al-Hamra ambush came without warning. Republican Guard units that intelligence had placed 30 kilometers north materialized from the smoke like ghosts themselves, hitting the convoy from 3 directions simultaneously. Elena was in the second vehicle. She heard the first explosion before she felt it, a sound like the sky splitting, and then the concussion wave hit and the world turned sideways. She came to in the sand. Her ears were ringing. The vehicle was on its side, 20 feet away, burning. She crawled. She crawled because that was what she had been trained to do when everything else stopped working. She crawled toward the sound of voices, toward the burning vehicle, toward the men who needed her. She found Sergeant Dominguez first. Shrapnel in the shoulder, deep but survivable. She packed it with what she had, and told him to hold it and keep moving. She found Private Castillo next. He was already gone. She closed his eyes and kept moving, because stopping was not something she could afford. She found the third man, Corporal Webb, pinned under a section of the vehicle door, his leg crushed. She worked for 11 minutes in the burning smoke to free him, used her belt as a tourniquet, got him moving. Then the secondary explosion hit. It picked her up and threw her 40 feet into a drainage ditch at the side of the road. She landed hard, something in her left shoulder snapping on impact. She lay in the ditch, looking up at the black sky, while small arms fire cracked and popped over her head, like a language she was tired of being fluent in. She lay there for 4 hours. When the QRF finally reached her position, she was still conscious, still holding her med bag against her chest, still mentally running through the list of her team members and what each one needed. They told her later that she was the only one from the forward position who had survived. She didn't speak for 3 days after that. Present day. Room 408. Elena looked up. Her eyes were dry. She had run out of tears for that particular memory somewhere around 2003. They airlifted me to a field hospital in Saudi Arabia, she said. Then Germany. Reconstructive surgery on my shoulder and my left side. 4 months of recovery. When they told me the official report listed the entire Ghost Riders team as KIA, I understood what they were doing. The ambush was an intelligence failure, a significant one. People with rank and with careers were going to be protected. The easiest way to protect them was to make sure none of us were around to contradict the official account. Holt's eyes were dangerous. They gave you a death certificate to cover up a command failure. They gave me an exit, Elena said simply. I took it. I changed my name. I moved. I became someone else. She looked at him. Someone who could still do the only thing she knew how to do, which was keep people alive. Holt was quiet for a long moment. His hand moved slowly across the bed rail toward her. He stopped just short of touching her arm. The Al-Mutla Ridge, he said. That was 2 days before Al-Hamra. That was you. Elena nodded. His voice had changed into something she hadn't heard from him before. Something unguarded. My radio man. You packed his chest wound in the back of a burning Humvee while I was screaming for evac, and you never once looked like you were going to stop. I wasn't going to stop, Elena said. He made it home, Holt said. Ortega. He lives in San Antonio now. He has 3 kids. He coaches Little League on Saturdays. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, Holt was looking at her with an expression that had no name in military vocabulary. It was something that belonged to a different language entirely. I have been trying to find you for 30 years, he said. Elena looked at him steadily. You found me, she said. Now let me finish saving you. The trouble arrived the next morning in an expensive suit. His name was Douglas Mercer, Senior Vice President of Claims Management at Continental Veterans Insurance Group, the private insurer contracted by the VA to manage supplemental coverage for high-risk veteran cardiac cases. He was 55, silver-haired, with the particular confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered to him. He walked into Ward 7 at 9:15 in the morning with a leather portfolio under his arm and a hospital administrator named Gerald Fitch trailing behind him like a shadow that had learned to wear a tie. Elena watched them from the nurse's station. She had seen men like Mercer before, not in hospitals, in different buildings, in different contexts, but the posture was identical. The posture of a man who had already made a decision and was now performing the process of making it. She went back to her charts. 20 minutes later, Diana appeared at her elbow. Her face was tight. Elena, there's a situation with your patient. The situation was this. Continental Veterans Insurance Group had reviewed Master Sergeant Roland Holt's case and determined that his current treatment protocol, specifically the aggressive cardiac medication management, and the proposed cardioversion procedure his cardiologist had scheduled for the following week, was not covered under his supplemental policy. The reason cited was a clause buried in Section 14 of his coverage agreement, a pre-existing condition exclusion. His arrhythmia, they argued, had been documented in a military medical record from 1994, which meant it predated his coverage enrollment, and therefore Continental was not liable for any treatment directly related to it. Without the insurance coverage, Holt couldn't afford the cardioversion. Without the cardioversion, his heart would continue deteriorating. His cardiologist had been explicit about the timeline. Weeks, not months. Elena read the denial letter twice, standing in the corridor outside room 408. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket and walked in. Holt was sitting up. He had already been told. She could see it in his face. Not the anger she had grown accustomed to, but something worse. The particular flatness of a man who has just been handed confirmation of something he always suspected. "They're not going to pay," he said. Elena sat down. "Tell me about the 1994 record. Field medical report from Somalia. I took shrapnel near the sternum. They noted an irregular heartbeat during treatment. It was stress-induced. It resolved." He looked at her. "I disclosed it during enrollment. They told me it didn't meet the threshold for exclusion." "They told you that verbally?" "The man across the desk told me, yes." Elena nodded slowly. She looked at the wall for a moment. Then she stood up. "I need you to trust me for the next 48 hours, she said. Holt looked at her. "In my experience, that sentence precedes something I'm not going to like." "In my experience," Elena said, "the things worth doing are usually the ones nobody likes." She looked at him steady. "Do you trust me, Sergeant?" A long pause. "You pulled 3 men out of a burning vehicle in a black sky in Kuwait," Holt said. "Yeah, I trust you." "Good." She headed for the door. "Don't talk to anyone from the insurance company or hospital administration without me present. And whatever you do," she glanced back, "don't throw anything at anyone. We need goodwill right now." Despite everything, Holt almost smiled. Elena found Douglas Mercer in the 6th-floor conference room that hospital administration reserved for important meetings and people who considered themselves important. He was reviewing documents with Gerald Fitch and didn't look up when she knocked and entered. "Can I help you?" Fitch said, with the tone of a man who hoped the answer was no. "I'm Elena Vasquez, Ward 7. I'm Master Sergeant Holt's primary nurse. I wanted to discuss the claims denial." Mercer looked up for the first time. He assessed her with the efficiency of a man accustomed to assessing things and dismissing them. "The denial has been reviewed and confirmed," he said. "If Mr. Holt wishes to appeal, he can submit a written request within 30 days. The process takes approximately 6 months. He'll be dead in 6 months, Elena said. Mercer's expression didn't change. "That's a medical opinion, not an insurance determination." Elena walked to the table and set down a folder. Inside was a copy of Holt's original enrollment paperwork, the verbal disclosure he had made regarding the 1994 Somalia record, and a note from the enrollment agent at the time confirming it had been reviewed and deemed insufficient for exclusion. She had spent her break and her lunch finding all of it. "This is the documentation from his original enrollment," Elena said. "The pre-existing condition your company is citing was disclosed, reviewed, and cleared at the time of enrollment by your own agent. Applying it retroactively as grounds for denial isn't a gray area, Mr. Mercer. It's also," she paused, "a violation of the Veterans Insurance Fairness Act of 2009. Fitch shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mercer looked at the folder without touching it. "Are you a lawyer, Miss Vasquez?" "No," Elena said. "I'm a nurse. But I've been reading insurance law for 3 years because this is the 4th time I've watched this exact thing happen to a veteran on this ward." She looked at him without blinking. "The first 3 times, I didn't say anything." She placed her hand flat on the folder. "I'm saying something now." Mercer leaned back. His voice dropped to something quieter and considerably less pleasant. "You're a ward nurse. You change IV bags and take temperatures. You have no standing in this conversation and no authority to threaten this institution or this company." He straightened his portfolio. "I suggest you go back to your floor before this becomes a conversation about your continued employment." Elena didn't move. She reached into her scrub pocket and placed her phone on the table, face up. The screen was on. A red bar across the top read, "Recording, 001842." I've been recording since I walked in, she said. Every word. It's already backed up. She looked at Mercer. You just told a nurse who was advocating for a critically ill veteran to sit down and be quiet, or lose her job. She tilted her head slightly. How do you think that sounds to a Veterans Affairs Oversight Committee? Mercer stared at the phone. The color left his face in a slow, deliberate way, like water draining from a basin. Fitch stood up. Now listen here, he started. The door opened. It opened because Roland Holt was standing on the other side of it. He had his IV pole in one hand, using it as a cane, and he was breathing harder than he should have been, and his cardiac monitor was alarming, distantly somewhere down the hall where he had disconnected it. He looked terrible. He looked magnificent. He looked at Mercer, with 31 years of accumulated authority, and said, I believe you have some paperwork to reverse. Mercer looked at Holt, at Elena, at the phone on the table. He picked up his pen. The cardio version was scheduled for a Tuesday. Elena was there before the surgical team arrived. She checked every piece of equipment herself, methodically and without apology, because that was who she was, and nobody in that room had the standing to tell her otherwise anymore. Holt looked up at her from the procedure table. He was calmer than she had ever seen him. Not the flatness of resignation, something different. The stillness of a man who has made his peace with the outcome and decided to fight anyway. You don't have to stay, he said. Elena snapped on her gloves. Yes, I do, she said simply. The procedure took 47 minutes. There were 2 moments where the room got very quiet, and the team exchanged the kind of looks that medical professionals exchange when numbers go in the wrong direction. She watched the monitor, and she breathed. And she did the thing she had always done in the worst moments of her life, which was refuse to accept the outcome until there was absolutely no other choice. The third shock converted him. The rhythm on the monitor steadied into something that looked, for the first time in weeks, like a heart that intended to keep going. Elena exhaled. She turned away from the table so nobody would see her face. Recovery was slow, and Holt was terrible at it. He tried to negotiate the terms of his bed rest on the first day. He submitted a written proposal on the second day, suggesting a modified activity protocol that Elena read carefully, annotated thoroughly, and returned to him with the word "no" written at the top in red pen. He spent the third day in dignified silence, which she understood was his version of accepting defeat. On the fourth day he started talking again. He talked about Kuwait, about the oil fires and the black sky, and the men he had carried, and the men he hadn't been able to. He talked about Somalia, and about coming home to a country that had moved on before he landed. He talked about the anger that had lived in his chest for 30 years, alongside the failing heart. 2 unwelcome tenants that had overstayed every welcome. Elena listened. She didn't fix it. She didn't reframe it, or redirect it, or offer him the clinical language of processing and healing. She just listened the way she had learned to listen in the field, completely, without preparing her response while he was still speaking. On the 6th day he asked about her. Not about Kuwait, not about Al-Hamra, about after. What did you do, he asked, when you became Elena Vasquez? When Reyes was gone, what did you do with all of it? Elena thought about it honestly. I worked, she said. I worked until I was too tired to think, and then I slept, and then I got up and worked again. She looked at her hands. For a long time, that was enough. To just keep people alive. To make the thing I knew how to do mean something in a world that wasn't on fire. And now, Holt said. Elena was quiet for a moment. Now, I think maybe surviving isn't the same thing as living. She glanced at him. I think I might be ready to find out the difference. Holt nodded slowly, like a man who understood exactly what that cost to say out loud. Douglas Mercer's retroactive denial was overturned within 72 hours of Elena's recording reaching the Veterans Affairs Oversight Committee. Continental Insurance launched an internal review. 3 other veteran cases on Ward 7 that had received similar denials were flagged for re-examination. Gerald Fitch submitted his resignation 11 days later, citing personal reasons that fooled no one. The Seattle Veterans Advocate, a nonprofit legal organization Elena had contacted the morning after the confrontation, took Holt's case and 3 others as the basis for a formal bad faith insurance complaint that would take 18 months to resolve and result in a settlement that nobody was allowed to discuss publicly, but that everyone in Ward 7 heard about anyway. Mercer kept his job. Men like Mercer usually did, but he didn't come back to Ward 7. Holt was discharged on a Friday morning, 6 weeks after Elena had first walked into room 408 without knocking. He was walking on his own, slower than he wanted to, and faster than his cardiologist recommended. He had a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks, and a medication schedule he had actually agreed to follow, which Elena considered the most significant victory of the entire 6 weeks. She walked into the elevator. They stood in the corridor for a moment, neither of them entirely sure how to end something that didn't feel like it was ending. Holt looked at her. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and held out his hand. In his palm was a challenge coin. It was old, the brass worn smooth at the edges, the emblem on the face almost rubbed away. Almost. She could still make out the image. A desert sun split down the middle like a broken compass. Ghost Riders, Holt said. I've carried it since Al-Mutla. I carried it because I always figured the person who deserved it most was still out there somewhere. Elena looked at the coin for a long moment. She took it. She turned it over in her fingers, ran her thumb across the worn face of it. The broken sun, the cracked compass pointing in every direction at once. She rolled up her left sleeve. She held the coin next to the tattoo. They matched perfectly. Worn in the same places, faded in the same direction. 2 things that had survived the same fire and come out the other side, still recognizable. Holt cleared his throat. I was thinking, he said, in the manner of a man who has been thinking for quite some time and is only now admitting it. I have a place on the coast. Hood Canal. Nothing complicated. A dock. A boat I don't use enough. He looked at her carefully. I could use someone with medical experience nearby, in case I do something inadvisable. Elena raised an eyebrow. You want to hire me as your personal nurse? No, Holt said. I want to offer you a place to stop running. He met her eyes. You've been saving people for 30 years, Elena. You've been keeping everyone alive, except yourself. Ghost Riders don't leave people behind. You told me that once over a burning Humvee in a black sky, and I never forgot it. Elena looked at the coin in her hand. She thought about Alhambra, about the black sky and the burning sand, and the names she recited like prayers in the dark. Dominguez, Castillo, Webb. She thought about Ortega in San Antonio, coaching Little League on Saturdays with 3 kids who existed because she had refused to stop. She thought about 30 years of keeping her sleeve down, and her past buried, and her name changed, and her face pointed always forward, because looking back felt too much like drowning. She thought about what it might feel like to finally stop. To the Ghost Riders, she said quietly. Holt's eyes didn't waver. To the ones who made it back. She closed her fingers around the coin, and for the first time in 30 years, Elena Reyes, who had survived a black sky and a burning desert and a classified casualty list and 3 decades of carrying the dead alongside the living, felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with a failing heart. It felt like arriving somewhere she hadn't known she was trying to reach. It felt like home. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Our veterans carried the weight of this country on their backs, and too many of them are still carrying it alone. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that time and distance and even death cannot break. Tell me in the comments, did you see the twist coming? And what do you think Elena should do next? Never leave anyone behind.